Hi folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse, where we talk about movies, music, art, and culture. And today, we're going to be taking another retrospective look, this time at the indie rock album from Kurt Weill, Wakin on a Pretty Daze. Believe it or not, I don't go into albums looking to hate them or bash them. One of the reasons I review a lot of material is because I'm looking to be surprised or caught off guard by something of shockingly good quality. I want to find that special album that blows my mind in a dozen conceivable ways. And more importantly, to quote Abed from Community, I like liking things. Hell, at the beginning of the year, you probably couldn't have told me that one of the most pleasant surprises of the year was a 4-part album from a white female rapper called Schizo. But Colette Carr's debut album was actually surprisingly decent. That being said, it's extremely difficult to not immediately form an opinion in your mind about what an act will sound like when you first hear about them, and I'll admit that can adjust your expectations in one way or another. I'll admit that going into critically acclaimed indie rock albums, I tend to have a sharper critical opinion than, say, a Backstreet Boys album. And knowing my own taste, if anything, makes it all the worst, as my ability to prejudge material is all the sharper. So when I heard about Kurt Weill's new album, it was hard not to immediately cast more than a few judgments on the guy without even hearing a single song. I mean, a critically acclaimed, pitchfork-adored lo-fi indie rocker primarily on a laid-back guitar with hazy, borderline incomprehensible vocals and lyrics that could only pretend to make sense on a good day? You bet your ass I prejudged the hell out of this guy and very nearly decided to ignore this album entirely. As I've said before, I don't have a lot of patience for white guys with acoustic guitars, and if they're half stoned and have pretensions to depth, that limited amount of patience drops to a critical low. And yeah, sure, there's Beck, but he proved to have extraordinary amounts of talent, both in instrumentation and songwriting, and I can't say that many of the lo-fi acts that followed in his wake did much to blow me out of the water. And so, before reviewing this album, Wakin on a Pretty Daze, an album title that just screamed stoner indie rock pretentiousness in the worst possible way, I took a deep breath and plowed my way through this guy's discography, prepared for song after song of bland, pretentious nothing that I'd be able to jettison out my mental airlock the second it was over. I didn't get that. And believe me, that was as much of a surprise as anything. Even as I say this, I'm still a little flummoxed why Kurt Weill works so well, why so many of his other acts have either bored or infuriated me. And while I wouldn't quite call myself a fan of his material, I found myself liking many more of his songs than I actively dislike. Let's start with the songwriting, which is arguably the spot I would have come down hardest if it had been any of his contemporaries. And yeah, while there is a certain profundity that shows up in his material, there's more nuggets of insight in his ramblings than I expected. It's almost impossible to know how many layers of irony or sarcasm Kurt Weill might be operating on, which adds a layer of ambiguity to his presentation I found intriguing, plus the fact that he's very bluntly honest on occasion, where it really sucks you into the fact that he's uncompromising of his views going forward, both good and bad. On top of that, he doesn't tend to leap into the trap of acoustic love songs. Hell, I don't think Kurt Weill could record a truly effective love song even if he tried. Most of that comes down to his delivery, which I would describe as something as a cross between Beck and Wayne Coyne if the latter was actively smoking pot over dropping acid. And while he does abuse vocal effects and reverb more than most, it contributes excellently to a certain atmosphere that completely justifies Kurt Weill's appeal to me. You see, I'd almost hesitate to call Kurt Weill an acoustic act at all. A lot of his material might have roots in acoustic rhythmic guitar, but it's often swallowed up in distortion and static that permeates the track, creating a rich expansiveness that still manages to feel organic and real. It might flirt with psychedelia at points, but that's only to suit the hazy, dusty feel of the tracks. Many critics have drawn connections between Weill and the gritty, guitar-based singer-songwriters of the 60s and early 70s, and I can definitely buy into that aesthetic, particularly when it feels as authentic as it does here. And of course, it helps that Kurt Weill is a gifted instrumentalist and songwriter all on his own. The guitar lines are often mesmerizingly simple, but contain enough shifts and complexity to keep me wanting more, and the natural, free-flowing nature of the writing is a perfect fit for it. I'm reminded of Casey Musgraves in a very good way, and like with her, they share the same affection for downbeat, rural Americana that feels all too real. Particularly because Weill doesn't hold back from including himself in his message. It almost feels like the events in Weill's songwriting could have actually really happened to him, or thoughts coming from a real place, and I gotta be honest, that does wonders for the atmosphere of the album. That being said, I do have my gripes with Kurt Weill, particularly considering the fact that he seems to be losing some of that richer instrumental texture with more recent albums. The distortion is peeled back, the vocals are cleaner, everything feels that much more polished, and I don't feel that's the greatest choice for preserving the atmosphere he's going for. But on the other hand, it does do wonders for exposing the sharper elements of Weill's songwriting, which I do appreciate, even though I wish more of that distorted grit would return. So, how does Wakin on a Pretty Daze deliver on that? Well, for the most part, it delivers well. In terms of my summer retrospective reviews, this is probably the album thus far I like the most. It's not phenomenal, and it's not going to change anybody's life, but Kurt Weill's latest release is a good, oftentimes great album. In terms of a relaxing, smooth summer record, you're not going to find many better than Wakin on a Pretty Daze, and it's definitely a fitting title. For starters, this might be Kurt Weill's most polished, clean work to date, with the majority of the distortion shoved off to the background. I'll be completely honest, I'm not the biggest fan of this direction. Some of the texture is ultimately lost, but Weill manages to create the same expansive sounds and the same dusty ambiance all the same. If I were to nitpick, I'd say his strident plucking is a little missed on the guitar. You don't get as much of that here, but I understand why it's been muted. There's very little momentum and exuberance to this album, and when it does come, it's in spurts and little variations on the established formula. The majority of the tracks really do flow together in a summer daze, and while Weill's voice is cleaner and closer to the top of the mix than it's ever been before, you can almost forget he's singing if you get lost in the whole instrumental experience. But of course, you don't want to forget the lyrics, because for the most part, Kurt Weill's songwriting is still strong as ever. The album is at its best when it mulls in Weill's drifting malaise, which sounds like stoned wisdom, but surprisingly isn't. The opening track, Wakin on a Pretty Day, is a song about burnout that paints Weill in an uncompromising light, showing both the shallowness and deep underlying sadness in it all. To draw a rather apt comparison, it's Margaritaville as sung by a disaffected stoner. And like Jimmy Buffett's masterpiece, I wouldn't be surprised if most people miss the point. The hilarious thing is that Weill's very acutely aware that many have painted him in the role of the burnout savant and have summarily dismissed his words as nonsense, and he actively lashes out against it in Was All Talk and Gold Tone, both which show off some excellent songwriting and some insight into Weill himself. What many have mistaken as the mumblings of a Gen X washout are closer in line to the stream of conscious verse of a beat poet, and it's a testament to Weill's talent that he actually manages to say something that's actually worthwhile. Pure Pain uses a musical and lyrical juxtaposition between the thrill of love and the knowledge that it will eventually fall apart. And Girl Called Alex shows Weill's longing for a girl to run away with him, yet he knows it would only be a sports car illusion. That's some real touching, grounded material that I really dug. However, the critics who have lobbed the stoner label at Kurt Weill don't exactly have a dearth of evidence. Both Snowflakes Are Dancing and Air Bud are the sort of dazed, confused, borderline nonsense that sound like they'd only begin to make sense when high. And Weill's mumbling delivery and general failure to stay on tune does have some of that hazy confusion that only makes me wonder if Weill wasn't trying or was just completely baked out of his mind. Yeah, I know he says he's never touched the stuff, but here I find that hard to believe. I reckon it was more of the former, though, perhaps in combination with the significantly more contemporary love songs. I can't help but feel that Kurt Weill was running on autopilot a bit here. Yeah, they aren't bad, but between Weill's unflinching honesty about his failings and his half-hearted attempts at romance, songs like Too Hard don't quite stick the landing. Part of the issue with that, of course, is the album's length. Most of the songs in this album are more than 4 minutes long, and while the album shockingly doesn't feel indulgent, unlike, let's say, Justin Timberlake's The 2020 Experience from earlier this year, it does feel a little languid and drawn out. Without that clear narrative through line, the added length only serves to add to that listless summer daze that this album cultivates. And yeah, sure, the atmosphere is still solid as all hell, but I feel that more sparks of wit and a bit of a tighter focus could have only enhanced this album's replay value. In comparison to Casey Musgrave's biting songwriting and desperate, emotionally charged edge on Same Trailer Different Park, Kurt Weill never quite rises up beyond his comfort zone, and that disappointed me a bit. Yet all that being said, I did really like Kurt Weill's Wakin on a Pretty Daze, and I would recommend it. It's not perfect, and I can already tell you that those of you who were looking for a bit more of a fuzzy, static-filled edge are definitely going to be disappointed, but Kurt Weill's strong songwriting mostly redeems this. I'll definitely agree with the sentiment that it's his most laid-back album of the summer thus far, and the best thing about it is the fact that throughout the album, Weil creates mellow music that shows all of its flaws and failings as well as its strength. John Mayer, Jack Johnson, Jason Mraz, this is how you do it properly. So, thanks for watching. I've got more videos coming up soon. Even though it has been a bit of a slow summer, that John Mayer and Chris Brown reviews are just around the corner. See you next time.